Okay, fun fit check before we get started on this kind of dark and serious topic. Check out my new shirt. Oh my god, I love this so much. You probably can't read it, that's fine. My partner got me this custom made. It is a quote from James Gunn's Superman. Specifically, it's a quote from Mr. Terrific, where he says, "Superman, a mean dog in a cape, a weird baby, and a squiggle man." And on the back, it actually says, "I'm goddamn Mr. Terrific." I love that film a lot. My partner's the best. Anyway, today we are talking about a pretty serious and scary and negative topic that I'm really hoping to add as much context and nuance and takes of my own as I possibly can. As someone who spent several years as a high school English teacher, as someone who works pretty closely with the publishing industry and has friends who are authors, translators, editors, publishers, agents, blah, blah, blah. And also as a booktuber and a writer and an editor myself, I'm hoping that I can give some insight into this conversation. So let's just get cracking because it's quite a serious one. So I recently came across this short video from the New Statesman, which was titled "The Decline of Literature." Wait, hang on, before we get into this, just very quickly, get your typing fingers ready because I want comments on this video. I want your insight. I have a lot to say, and I'm sure you do too. As I go through this video, there are going to be loads of things that I cover, and I want your opinions, because so much of what I'm going to say here will be anecdotal from my professional and personal lived experiences. And I need yours as well, because if you give your anecdotes, if you give your personal experiences, whether they be professional, especially if you're a teacher or a librarian or even a politician, give me your insights. I don't think politicians watch my channel, but anyway, I want your insights. Please leave comments. I need to get a broader understanding of what's going on. Thank you.
English literature no longer makes the top 10 of A-level subject choices. English departments at universities are regularly closing. Studies show dramatic drops in literacy and reading, particularly amongst teenagers.
The decline of literature, I think, is most interesting to me as a kind of casualty of the end of the culture of reading, which has been a central feature of our civilization since the invention of the printing press. There was a survey last year that found more than a third of adults who said they once read regularly for pleasure no longer do so. There's another report earlier this year from the National Literacy Trust, which reports shocking and dispiriting falls in children's reading for pleasure. Children's reading has never been lower. The number of 8 to 18-year-olds reading for pleasure has halved in the last 2 decades. And a report from the OECD released at the end of last year, which found that literacy was declining and stagnating in most OECD countries. I think what we're seeing is the replacement of the culture of the book by the culture of the screen.
The New Statesman.
I'm sure you'll agree that it's not a particularly positive video, and it's something that upset me, but it's also something that I immediately saw as kind of cynical, and I hoped that I could find a positive angle. And I don't mean we should put a positive spin on this, none of it is positive, but rather maybe things aren't quite as doom and gloom as this cynical conversation points out. But I did read the study that is referenced in the video, but we'll come to that in a second. First, let's address how the video begins. The first 2 things that we learn in this video are that English literature no longer makes the top 10 of A-level choices. Now, for anyone who doesn't live in the UK and is wondering what an A-level is, the way that our education system works is that we have primary school, secondary school, and something called sixth form. Primary school is from around the age of 5 to the age of 11. Year 1 to year 6. Secondary school is age 11 to 16, year 7 to 11. And then the final 2 years before you go off to university at age 18 are called sixth form. And a sixth form can be something that is kind of attached to a secondary school, or it can be a separate college building campus thing in its own right. You either go to the sixth form attached to your school if your school has one, or you go off to a college. I went to a college, and you spend 2 years there age 16 to 18. And at the end of it, the certificates that you walk away with are called A-levels. And for the first of those 2 years, you study 4 subjects of your choice. And in the second, you narrow it down to 3, unless you're particularly clever and you might stick to 4. And in this New Statesman video, they reveal that for the first time ever, English literature is no longer in the top 10 subjects studied. And honestly, what took me by surprise was the fact that it ever was. Call me naive, but I was an A-level student, and I used to be a high school teacher, and I taught A-level English literature. And when I was teaching in particular, it already felt like a slightly more niche subject. The sciences always seemed a lot more popular. The classes were larger, and there were more of them, and there were more teachers teaching the sciences. And that includes mathematics and statistics as well. And especially computer-based subjects, which are increasingly more and more popular. Anything to do with technology only goes up in popularity year by year. And other humanities subjects are super popular as well, including English language, which, from my own personal experience as a student and a teacher, English language is more popular than English literature. Because again, it's slightly more of a science than a humanity. Humanities? Can you just say humanity? Anyway, the study of linguistics and etymology is fascinating. It's something that I really like. And again, when I was teaching, it was a more popular subject. So this news is disappointing, but for me, I was surprised that English literature was ever as popular as it was. I honestly didn't know that. It was kind of nice to hear that, even though it's declining, I was still kind of happy to know that it was ever that popular. And an argument that I might make against this particular point is that people taking less of an interest in literature as an academic subject doesn't necessarily reflect people's enjoyment of literature as a hobby. I spend a lot of time in my local library and in local bookshops, and honestly, over the past 10 years of doing that, of frequently going into bookshops at all different times of the week, I feel like bookshops are only getting busier and busier. This is very anecdotal. I'm not giving any hard evidence here. This is my personal experience, and that is limited. I'm aware of that, but people go to bookshops a lot. Like a lot. And often when I'm in the fantasy section, especially, the section where you find fantasy, science fiction, horror, etc., the more niche genres, those sections are always absolutely jam-packed with girls in their late teens and 20s. And even though I've spent a lot of my time on this channel saying mean things about the romantasy genre, Waterstones, as a chain company in the UK, now has a dedicated romantasy section in the broader fantasy section. And every time I go into a big Waterstones, there are always groups of girls huddled in the romantasy section, excitedly discussing their favorite books and sharing them and recommending them. And even if I don't like romantasy in general, it's lovely to see that happening. It's great to see so much enthusiasm. And I'll tell you this as well. Right from when I was teaching 10 years ago up until now, as someone who, again, spends a lot of time in bookshops, manga. Manga is so popular, especially amongst boys of that same age bracket, late teens and early 20s. There are always young men in the manga section, picking up and arguing about their favorite manga, which they probably got into because they were watching anime on things like Netflix and Crunchyroll. And then they got into manga, and again, manga is so popular. So studying literature at A-level might be declining, but reading as a hobby seems incredibly popular amongst young people. I'm in my mid-30s now, so maybe I'm starting to get out of the loop, but I know that I have a lot of people in my audience who are late teens, early 20s. So if you're one of those people, please speak up about your own personal experiences and your friends, because I feel like reading as a hobby is incredibly popular right now. But again, this is anecdotal. The next thing that they say, which is tacked on to that first point, is that English departments at universities are often closing, and I know that that's the case because it's happened in my local university. The English department has shrunk and might be closing altogether, and that is frightening. I am not happy about that at all. Honestly, I don't have a lot to add here. This is just horrible. But is it a lack of interest? Is it where the university is choosing to put its funding and its focus? That is something I don't know. I went searching for any insider information, any other articles that I could find. There is a surprising lack of information when it comes to giving context behind why literature departments close. Universities can be kind of secretive in that way, and they're not giving much information away, which is frustrating. I don't have a lot to add in that area. Now, halfway through this pretty short video, they cite 2 studies. The second one they name, and I looked it up and I read it, and I'll come to that in a sec. The first one, they didn't say what the study was, who made it, where they read it, nothing. And they say in the video that that first study revealed that 1/3 of adults who claim that they once read for pleasure no longer do. Again, I'm going to give one anecdote, and it is not about my job, it's not about my previous work, it's not about teaching or anything. It's about my friend. I have a friend, my best friend, who actually got me this copy of Pride and Prejudice that I used in the thumbnail, and I just put it here to show it off because it's gorgeous. So my best friend has 2 children. He's a working class guy. They have 2 daughters, ages 6 and 3, and their life is difficult. They have no money for their own personal recreation. They spend every single penny that they both earn on childcare and things like food and bills and the life necessities that we all need. I don't have children, and the amount of freedom that that gives me is enormous. The amount of time and money that I can spend on myself is ridiculous. I eat more takeaways than they do. I go out more than they do. And I buy and read more books than they ever could. And I just think we need to keep in mind that this is true across the board. We are getting poorer, at least in the Western world, in the UK, the US, and many parts of Europe. We are getting poorer. Our time is being squeezed out of us, especially if we choose to have children, which is our right to do. So this idea that there's a decline in reading is a hobby that takes a lot more energy than people think it does, especially when compared to putting on a film or a TV show that you can all sit and watch as a family. To bring up my friend again, I've had the song Golden from K-pop Demon Hunters stuck in my head for a week because I went to visit them last week and we watched that film twice because it's a good film that the kids both like. We all get to enjoy it and watch it, and you can just put it on whenever and watch it over and over again thanks to streaming. Reading is not that. Reading requires a lot more effort. Yes, they read to the kids at bedtime. Yes, they encourage their kids to read. But when are they supposed to read? When do they have a minute to do anything? And quite often, even as someone who loves to read, when I'm exhausted from work, when I get home from a long trip, or when I'm just not in the right headspace, I do not turn to reading to relax. Quite often I want to play a video game or watch a film because it's just easier and my brain has already been so taxed. Reading is my job. It's my job. It's my favorite hobby, but it doesn't mean I'm always up for it. And I don't know how I'd ever find the time or the energy or the patience or the money to spend on books and keeping up with publishing and talking about books and going to book clubs or watching BookTube or whatever else. How would I do any of that if I had 2 children? It wouldn't happen. All of this would go away if I had 2 kids. It's not happening. I don't like kids, but I have so much sympathy for my fellow adults. Working class people who have no time. It reeks of privilege, this attitude that adults who used to read don't read anymore because life's fucking hard. It's really difficult. If I complained about that, I would be so naive and really just letting my privilege show as someone who is part of a relationship with 2 full incomes and no children and 1 tiny cat. I have the time to do these things. My friends don't. And I haven't mentioned the fact that my friend used to be a voracious reader. A lot of the books on my shelves were recommendations from a time when he didn't have children, books that he read when he was a teenager or in his early 20s. He got me into Terry Pratchett when we were at university together. That's not so easy anymore. The guy spends most of his time listening to podcasts. At any brief moment he has to just relax, he listens to a podcast because he can close his eyes. Life is hard. Leave them alone. Now, the other report that they cited is from the National Literacy Trust, and we're just going to go over some of that report here. The report is titled Children and Young People's Reading in 2025. This report is based on 114,970 responses to our annual literacy survey from children and young people aged 5 to 18 in early 2025. It includes findings on reading enjoyment, frequency, and motivation, and explores responses by age, gender, socioeconomic background, and geographical region. Our survey shows that the reading crisis persists, with the number of children and young people who say they enjoy reading and read daily continuing to decline. Key findings: reading enjoyment. In 2025, the percentage of children and young people who told us they enjoyed reading was its lowest in 20 years. Just 1 in 3, 32.7%, of children and young people aged 8 to 18 said that they enjoyed reading in their free time in 2025. This marks a 36% decrease in reading enjoyment levels since we started asking about this in 2005. The drop in reading enjoyment over the last year has been especially steep among primary-aged children and boys, particularly boys aged 11 to 16. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure what primary-aged means here, because that to me sounds like the age when you're at primary school, which is not 11 to 16, that's secondary school, but maybe it just means an important age for cognitive development. That's your primary age. That kind of makes sense, I guess. Regardless, this is not a surprise to me as an ex-teacher. Reading was always the more popular hobby amongst girls. And I can go all the way back into my own childhood in the 90s to talk about this. Anecdotally, I noticed this when I was a kid. And then when I became a teacher, we share articles. We would talk about statistics. We would share strategies that we might have to try and get boys to read. Now, in case you don't know, I'm a transgender woman, and when I was teaching, I was a man. And something that I was told when I was training to be a teacher was that it is easier in the UK. I don't know if this is true. This is, again, anecdotal, but I was told this several times by the people who trained me and by other teachers. It is easier to get hired as an English teacher if you're a man, because most English teachers are women, and so men are considered more of a novelty. And I've always personally assumed that the reason there are fewer men who go into teaching literature is because there are fewer men who like reading literature. Because they were boys who didn't like literature, now they're men who don't like literature. And so male English teachers are unique and rare because more women like literature. And again, when I was teaching and I was a guy, my department had, I think, 7 people in it. I can't remember now. It was a horrible job. It was a horrible time. I hated everyone. But I was one of 2 men in that department. And we were both in our 20s. So 2 young men teaching literature to a bunch of high school kids, half of whom are boys who don't care about reading. It makes sense, the idea that you would hope that young men could convince young boys to read, that they could get them into reading, instill in them a passion for reading. And honestly, that is the thing in my job that I was best at. I was terrible at behavior management and paperwork and all the extra stuff that teachers have to do. But I was good at communicating critical thinking skills and a passion for reading. I had students, many of whom were boys, who got into reading because I instilled in them a spark to read. It was something I loved doing. It's the reason this channel exists, because sharing my passion for literature has always been the thing I've enjoyed most. It was the one thing I loved about teaching. I wasn't very good at the rest of it, but I loved talking about books. So here I am, here we are, this is what I do. And I know that some of those students went on to become teachers, or they tried to write novels and get me to read their novels. I'm talking boys and girls. In that respect, I did my job. I got some teenage boys into reading. Great. But it's always been a battle. Always. The study goes on to say, reading frequency. Fewer than 1 in 5, 18.7%, 8 to 18-year-olds told us that they read something daily in their free time in 2025. Again, the lowest levels we've recorded, with daily reading levels decreasing by nearly 20 percentage points since 2005. Even among children aged 5 to 8, daily reading rates dropped by 3.4 percentage points in the past year to 44.5%, and have dropped by 9.1 percentage points since we started asking this age group in 2019. And I'm not going to read you the whole study. I've linked it in the description. You can go check it out. But I just want to highlight this point here that I think is really interesting. What would motivate children and young people to read, 8 to 18. An important way to address the decline in reading enjoyment and frequency is to shed light on what drives or deters reading among children and young people, particularly for those who tell us they don't enjoy it. In 2005, 2 in 5 children and young people were motivated to read when material relates to a favorite film or TV series, 38.1%, or match their interests or hobbies, 37.1%. 3 in 10, 30.9%, were drawn in by an interesting book cover or title. 1 in 4, 26.6%, valued having the freedom to choose what they read. And none of this comes as a surprise to me, again, as an ex-teacher. Addressing the first point, in one of the schools that I taught at, we used to have library lessons once a week. You would take a class, I think they had to be year 7 or year 8. They didn't do it with the older ones because they had like exams to cram for and stuff, but the ones who were aged like 11 to 14 maybe, they would have library lessons, and you would take a class of kids into the library and get them to pick up a book and sit and read it in silence for about 50 minutes. That was it. That's all you did. Come on, everyone, let's go to the library where other kids are studying at the computers or whatever. Pick up a book and read it. And here's what would happen. And again, this is anecdotal, this is my experience, but I had a year 8 class, so they are aged 12, 13. Most of the girls would pick up books that they had heard were good for their age group and popular, and they would dig into them. I remember them reading things like Noughts and Crosses, Howl's Moving Castle, quite often because they'd seen the Ghibli film. Obviously, the Harry Potter books were as popular as ever. The Hunger Games, that was huge at that time. Lots of those books. There would be a few boys who would read Percy Jackson books. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson books are enormously popular amongst boys of that age. Great. And then at least half the boys, maybe 3/4 of the boys in that class, would pick up books that had anything to do with video games or sports. And they would flick through them. They'd be mostly picture books about Minecraft or Manchester United or whatever. And they would look at the pictures and they would whisper under their breath about the things that they were looking at. And that was it. That was the stuff that they liked. So I'm not surprised by this information at all. Again, this is how it's been. It was such a struggle to get the boys to even read by themselves. And unfortunately, I wasn't permitted the chance to kind of guide their selection process. It was so hands-off. And it's because in that library, there were other kids studying and there was a librarian and things were going on. They were not the only people there. And so they had to be quiet and they had to sit quietly and read. And it was very restricted. And I was frustrated because I wanted the library to ourselves so that I could guide them, so that I could give recommendations and try and be a bit more hands-on with their selection process because, well, that's what these statistics show. They need guidance, they need covers and titles that catch their attention, and it's also good to have books that relate to their existing hobbies. That's great. It makes me think about the sheer popularity right now of Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinnerman. Those books are great. I've only read the first one, but I've made a video about it. Dungeon Crawler Carl's amazing. Those books are video game-inspired isekai stories that are really, really fun and engaging and really clever. And I am very sure that teenage boys would absolutely love them. Maybe they do. Maybe they're really popular amongst teenage boys. I don't know. But Dungeon Crawler Carl is exactly the kind of thing that I would have given to a 14-year-old boy in my class and said, read this. Actually, is it appropriate? I think it's appropriate. I'm not very good with children. I don't know what's appropriate. Anyway, provided it is appropriate, that's what I would give them. So these things are not surprising at all. If you force a 12-year-old to read Jane Eyre, you're gonna have a difficult time. I don't think any of that is shocking at all. And at the very end of that video, they said that we're seeing the replacement of the culture of the book with the culture of the screen. And that to me really feels like Old Man Yells at Cloud. Because for centuries, we have had older people complain about how kids these days spend too much time doing X, Whatever that thing is, whatever's popular. Kids these days and their phones, kids these days and their video games, kids these days and their TVs, kids these days and their magazines, kids these days and their record players. You can go on and on. You can keep going further back and back and back. It's ridiculous. We need to stop this right now. And again, speaking anecdotally from my own experience, I didn't grow up reading. I've talked about this so many times on this channel, but I was a very confused and bullied and lonely child. Up until the age of 8, I spent all of my time glued to the TV with square eyes. That's all I did. I watched cartoons, I watched anime, I watched TV shows. I was absolutely obsessed with Power Rangers and Pokemon. When I was 8, I got a PlayStation, the original PlayStation. And then all I did from the age of 8 to 16 was play video games. They were my entire world. I dreamed of becoming a video games journalist right from the age of 8. I would pick up a PlayStation magazine and dream of writing for that magazine. And I have written about video games for some publications online, including IGN and stuff, but I chose to do this instead. IGN doesn't pay well. At all. Video games were my whole life for the age of 8 to 16. And I still love video games. I'm covered in video game tattoos. I got a tattoo of Sora from Kingdom Hearts. I got a tattoo from Bloodborne. Bloodborne came out when I was 25. That game means the whole world to me. I still love video games with all my heart. Most of the YouTube channels I subscribe to are about video games. Anyway, look, I love these things. I love these hobbies. I love TV, I love film, and I love video games. I love the screen. And I look at my phone way more than I should. The idea that books are being replaced by screens, it just seems so naive. I mean, it's just a soundbite. It's just one guy saying a thing before a TikTok ends. It's not really reflective of how he feels or the deeper nuance and meaning of that. That's all we get is just this little statement, which in isolation feels quite clickbaity because people are going to comment on that and have thoughts and feelings. And that is exactly what I'm doing here. I have thoughts and feelings about that because it just seems like such a naive statement. The screen has been around for decades. TVs have been in homes for 50 years. My parents are glued to their TV. I read a lot and I'm also glued to my TV. I just don't think that you can have one or the other. It's kind of silly to blame screens. People will read if they want, and it doesn't mean they won't look at screens all day as well. I certainly do. Anyway, I'm just getting ratty and irate now. It's just a silly statement. But I do understand it. As a teenager, I spent so much time online, in forums and chat rooms, talking to my friends on Instant Messenger. And that has only grown in popularity with social media, with Discord, with Twitch. The culture of influencers and Twitch streamers, people like me who talk about things that aren't books. I get it. Right now, you're choosing to watch this screen instead of reading a book. It doesn't mean you don't like reading. I know you do, because you're here. I don't have a larger point to make. Now I'm just getting ranty. I don't know if reading is declining. I have given so much anecdotal evidence. But I also know one thing. I can cite my source here, which is that more books, at least here in the UK, are being published than ever before. More people are writing books, and more people are reading those books. They have to be. The publishing industry is only growing. Indie publishers are thriving. Independent bookshops are thriving, although there are economic and political reasons why they're not, but it's not to do with customers, it's not to do with foot traffic, it's to do with the government. If publishing is only growing, including indie presses and self-published authors, if independent bookshops are popping up all the time and doing well, I don't believe that there is a decline in reading at all. And maybe there is. But I don't see how. Especially when I look at the sheer popularity of romantasy. Like, I hate J.K. Rowling, of course I do, but Harry Potter, everyone always says Harry Potter turned a generation onto reading. My generation. I get it. But it wasn't even me. I didn't read Harry Potter as a kid. I've never read all of the Harry Potter books. I read the first 4 when I was an adult. Anyway, people are right when they say that. Yeah, Harry Potter did turn a generation onto reading. So did The Hunger Games, so did Percy Jackson, so did Twilight. And now, so have Rebecca Yarros and Sarah J. Maas and all of these romantasy authors. There are always trends and crazes that come along to suddenly turn a huge, huge group of the population into readers. Nothing might ever match the impact of Harry Potter. Fine, but there are always things that come along that turn people into readers. Reading is not dying. The publishing industry is doing so well. I don't think channels like mine would be as popular as they are if it wasn't for people liking to read. I don't know. I don't trust that this is true. And going right back to the start of that video, just because fewer people are choosing to study literature in an academic sense, it does not mean that fewer people are reading for pleasure. And maybe there is a problem with kids right now. I haven't been a teacher for 10 years, I think. 8? It's like 8 years. Anyway, it's been a long time since I've been in a high school in the UK. Things have changed. Maybe things are getting worse. I don't know. We've got whole new generations. So I have to admit, I only have so much insight. But the fact that my local libraries and bookshops are always full of people, the fact that more books are being published than ever before, the fact that the publishing industry is only growing, the fact that I see as many people reading in public, reading on the subway, reading on trains as I ever have, I'm not worried. But so much of this has been anecdotal, and I'm sure your comments will be too. But let me know. Let me know if you agree with this, if you're scared, if you're nervous, if you think I have a point. I want your insights. Thank you. And if you've enjoyed this, I have a Patreon. Please go to the description and click on my Patreon and support me on Patreon if you've enjoyed this, because I love doing this and I'd love your support. Thank you very much. Subscribe for books.